The journey begins on a dark, dusty road in the remote countryside of Haiti. A horse-drawn carriage travels rapidly through the night, carrying a young American couple named Neil Parker and his beautiful fiancée, Madeline Short. They have traveled to this isolated island with plans to be wed, but the unsettling atmosphere of the land grips them immediately. Suddenly, the carriage screeches to a halt as they encounter a strange, somber group of locals performing a burial rite in the middle of the road. The carriage driver reveals a terrifying local secret. He explains that people in Haiti bury their dead deep beneath the roads so that travelers can watch over the graves, preventing local sorcerers from digging up the corpses. The driver whispers a word that sends chills down their spines.
Zombie!
He describes them as the living dead, soulless corpses ripped from their graves and forced to work in the fields and sugar mills under the cover of night. Neil and Madeline dismiss the warnings as mere island superstition, but the darkness of the road is about to manifest into a real nightmare. Without warning, a tall, menacing figure steps directly out of the shadows, blocking the path of the carriage. This is Murder Legendre, a sinister and powerful voodoo master who rules the local region with absolute terror. Legendre stands completely still, staring intensely into the carriage with a piercing, hypnotic gaze that seems to look directly through Madeline's soul. As the carriage attempts to navigate around him, Legendre reaches out and snatches Madeline's silk scarf directly from her neck. The carriage driver panics, whipping the horses into a frantic gallop to escape the scene, leaving the evil sorcerer standing alone in the dark, clutching the stolen fabric. Legendre smiles wickedly, knowing he now holds a personal item he can use to perform dark voodoo rituals against the young woman. Neil and Madeline finally arrive safely at their destination, a massive, luxurious plantation owned by a wealthy colonial named Charles Beaumont. Charles met Madeline during her travels from New York and was so utterly infatuated by her beauty that he invited the young couple to host their wedding ceremony at his estate that very evening. However, behind his wealthy and hospitable facade, Charles hides a dark, dangerous obsession. He is desperately in love with Madeline and cannot bear the thought of her marrying another man. Just hours before the ceremony, Charles corners Madeline in the parlor, begging her to leave Neil and elope with him instead, promising her unlimited wealth and status. Madeline firmly refuses his advances, telling him that her heart belongs entirely to Neil and asks him not to ruin their special night. Driven to absolute madness by her rejection, Charles decides to do the unthinkable. He climbs into a private carriage driven by a silent, dead-eyed servant and travels deep into the isolated mountains to seek the assistance of Murder Legendre. Charles arrives at Legendre's massive, industrial sugarcane mill, a hellish place that operates entirely on the backs of the living dead. Charles watches in absolute horror as a line of blank-eyed, pale-faced zombies endlessly march in a circle, pushing heavy wooden beams to grind the sugar crops. The environment is completely silent except for the rhythmic, agonizing creaking of the machinery. To Charles's shock, one of the mindless zombie workers loses his balance and plummets directly into the massive, crushing gears of the cane grinding pit. The other undead workers do not even blink, pause, or look down. They simply keep marching forward over the spot where their companion just died. Legendre steps out of the shadows, mocking Charles's visible fear. Charles explains his desperate situation, stating that he will sacrifice anything he owns if he can just have Madeline for himself. Legendre smiles, explaining that conventional methods will never work because Madeline is deeply in love with Neil. The only way to secure her, Legendre reveals, is to strip away her soul. He produces a small glass vial containing a volatile, secret voodoo potion. Legendre explains that the drug will not kill her permanently, but it will induce a state of complete paralysis that mimics death perfectly, allowing her to be buried so they can later dig her up as a mindless, obedient automaton. Though horrified by the cruelty of the plan, Charles's selfish obsession overrides his morality, and he accepts the vial. Legendre gives him strict instructions: use only a pinpoint amount, hidden inside a glass of wine or sprinkled onto a flower. Charles hurries back to his plantation just as the wedding guests arrive. As Madeline prepares to walk down the grand staircase to join Neil at the altar, Charles intercepts her under the pretense of offering a final, congratulatory wedding gift. He hands her a beautiful red rose, which he has secretly coated with a pinpoint drop of Legendre's voodoo potion. Madeline, completely unsuspecting of the danger, smiles graciously and deeply inhales the sweet scent of the flower, absorbing the microscopic toxins into her lungs. The wedding ceremony goes smoothly, and Neil and Madeline are officially pronounced husband and wife. The guests gather in the grand dining hall for a celebratory feast, but the atmosphere quickly takes a tragic turn. As Madeline raises a silver goblet to offer a loving toast to her new husband, she looks down into the liquid and sees a horrifying apparition. The water reflects the intense, glaring eyes of Murder Legendre staring back at her from the shadows. Madeline gasps in terror. Within seconds, her vision blurs, her breathing stalls, and she collapses directly into Neil's arms, completely lifeless. The next day, a somber funeral is held, and Madeline's body is placed inside a grand stone tomb located in a remote cemetery. That very night, under the cover of absolute darkness, Murder Legendre and Charles Beaumont sneak past the cemetery gates. They break open the heavy stone door of the crypt, pry open the wooden coffin, and pull Madeline's limp, paralyzed body out into the night air. Legendre performs a dark reanimation ritual, awakening her body from its death-like trance, but leaving her mind completely blank. They carry her away to Legendre's fortress, leaving the tomb completely empty. Meanwhile, Neil is completely consumed by overwhelming grief and sorrow. He spends his days sitting alone in a dim, noisy Haitian bar, desperately drowning his sorrows in alcohol. As he drinks heavily, his mind begins to play tricks on him. He hallucinates ghostly, white apparitions of Madeline dancing through the shadows of the bar, reminding him of everything he lost. Unable to shake a bizarre, instinctual feeling that something is deeply wrong, Neil breaks away from the bar and races through the night back to the cemetery. He sprints to Madeline's tomb, only to find the heavy stone entrance smashed open. He peers inside the dark crypt and finds the coffin completely empty. Terrified and confused, Neil seeks the immediate help of Dr. Brunner, the only man who understands the dark spiritual landscape of the island. Dr. Brunner listens to Neil's frantic story and confirms his worst fears. The missionary explains that evil witch doctors on the island use secret paralyzing drugs to fake the deaths of their targets, digging them up later to serve as mindless zombie slaves. Dr. Brunner reveals that Murder Legendre has used this exact horrific method to eliminate all of his former business and political rivals, turning them into a personal army of silent bodyguards. Realizing that Madeline is likely still alive, Neil and Dr. Brunner pack their gear and begin a dangerous trek into the jagged mountains, tracking the clues directly toward Legendre's fortified castle, which sits on a sheer cliffside overlooking the crashing ocean waves. Inside the Gothic fortress, Madeline has been fully reanimated, but she is a completely different person. She sits silently at a grand piano, her fingers moving across the keys to play a haunting, melancholy melody. Her eyes are wide, glassy, and completely vacant, staring straight ahead into nothingness. She can no longer speak, smile, or recognize anything around her. Charles Beaumont sits across the room, watching her play, and is instantly hit with a wave of intense guilt and self-loathing. He realizes that this soulless, robotic shell is not the vibrant woman he fell in love with. He approaches Madeline, begging her to smile at him or say his name, but she looks right through him as if he does not exist. Charles turns to Legendre in desperation, weeping and begging the voodoo master to reverse the chemical spell and bring her back to normal. But Legendre simply roars with laughter, mocking Charles's weakness. Legendre calmly informs him that the spell cannot be reversed, and furthermore, he has no intention of letting Madeline go. Legendre reveals that he has developed his own dark desires for the beautiful young woman, and plans to keep her in his castle forever. When Charles threatens to expose the crimes to the authorities, Legendre smiles wickedly and reveals a final, terrifying twist. Hours earlier, Legendre secretly spiked Charles's glass of wine with a slower-acting strain of the voodoo drug. Charles looks down at his hands in absolute horror as his fingers begin to stiffen and lock into place. His throat tightens, his voice fades to a faint whisper, and he realizes that he is slowly being transformed into a mute, helpless zombie slave himself, completely powerless to stop Legendre's plans. Outside the castle gates, Neil and Dr. Brunner successfully scale the dangerous cliffs and slip inside the stone corridors undetected. However, Legendre's psychic connection to the castle is absolute. He instantly senses Neil's living presence within the walls. Sitting at his desk, Legendre stares into space, focusing his intense mental energy to take total control of Madeline's physical body. Under his silent command, Madeline walks over to a table, picks up a large carving knife, and begins moving silently through the dark hallways to locate Neil, raising the blade high into the air to strike him down. But just as she is about to plunge the knife into his back, Dr. Brunner lunges out from behind a heavy velvet curtain, grabbing her wrist with all his strength. The knife clatters loudly onto the stone floor. The sudden shock breaks her immediate violent programming, and she wanders out onto the castle balcony in a daze, completely detached from reality. Neil hears the commotion and follows Madeline out onto a narrow stone escarpment high above the jagged rocks and crashing ocean waves. Suddenly, Murder Legendre steps out onto the balcony above them, flanked by his elite army of zombie guardians. Legendre points a finger at Neil and commands his undead henchmen to march forward and throw the intruder off the cliff. Neil draws his revolver and fires multiple rounds directly into the chests of the oncoming zombies. The bullets strike them square in the torso, but because they are completely impervious to physical pain, the zombies do not even stumble. They simply keep marching forward with their hands outstretched, cornering Neil against the edge of the precipice. Just as the mindless guardians are about to push Neil over the side to his death, Dr. Brunner quietly sneaks up behind Legendre on the upper balcony. Summoning all his strength, the missionary delivers a powerful, crushing blow to the back of Legendre's head, knocking the evil voodoo master completely unconscious. The exact second Legendre's conscious mind goes dark, his mental grip over his slaves instantly shatters. Left entirely without any telepathic direction or commands, the zombie guardians continue walking forward in a straight line, stepping cleanly off the edge of the escarpment and plunging hundreds of feet down into the watery grave below. Legendre suddenly awakens from the blow, scrambling to his feet to attack Neil and Brunner near the edge of the balcony. But before he can strike, the partially paralyzed Charles Beaumont uses the absolute last ounce of his fading human strength. Driven by pure vengeance for the destruction of his life and the theft of Madeline, the massive impact throws the evil voodoo master off balance, sending him flying over the stone railing. The sheer momentum carries Charles over the edge as well, and both men plummet side by side down the massive cliffside, crashing violently into the rocky ocean below. The exact moment Murder Legendre's body hits the rocks and his life ends, his dark voodoo spell is instantly broken forever. Madeline's vacant, dead-eyed stare suddenly vanishes. She gasps deeply for air as full human consciousness rushes back into her mind. She looks around the balcony, instantly recognizes her loving husband, and cries out his name as she collapses happily into Neil's arms. The horror is finally over, and the young couple embraces tightly under the morning sun, as Dr. Brunner smiles in relief, leaving the dark legacy of the white zombie buried in the past. What lengths would you go to just to force someone to love you? Would you sacrifice your own humanity just to own a hollow shell? Let me know your thoughts on this classic pre-code horror masterpiece in the comments below. If you enjoyed this detailed breakdown on Midnight Recaps, make sure to smash the like button right now to help us beat the algorithm. If you want to make sure you never miss another dark, twisted movie breakdown, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you are always ready for the next story. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next recap.